Good morning and happy Thursday. I hope that your web quest into the life and works of Johannes Brahms went well yesterday. Today, we're going to do a little deeper dive. So we will be working off of a PDF that you should see on your Google form and also linked on your Google Classroom assignment. It looks like this with a picture of Johannes Brahms right there. So. All right, he was a composer of the Romantic era. He was born on May 7th, 1833 in Hamburg, Germany, and he died on April 3rd, 1897 in Vienna, Austria. He was the son of an orchestral string bass player, and he was not a good student in school, but he excelled at the piano. And he studied at first with a friend of his father's, and then with the most respected music teacher in Hamburg, Germany, which wasn't a small town. Johannes helped his family financially by playing popular music in dance halls. By the age of 16, he was performing throughout Europe as a concert pianist. During his concert tours, Brahms met many famous musicians and composers who recognized his outstanding talent. He became friends with another composer, Robert Schumann. At 21, he took a position as a conductor of a municipal orchestra in Detmold, Germany. At Detmold, he began to devote more time to composition. In 1856, when he was 23, his friend Robert Schumann died. He moved to Dusseldorf, Germany to console Schumann's widow, Clara, who we've done an entire thing about. He eventually fell in love with her. Brahms and Clara Schumann remained in love for 40 years, but never married. 40 years. He relied on her advice and musical expertise throughout his career as a composer. Now, I'm going to stop right here and say that I'm not sure that this is entirely accurate. I've heard in other places that Brahms actually moved in with the Schumann family before Robert Schumann died to study with him. Like, he was like in residence, like a protege of his, and so he was much closer to the family than that. It's not like he just moved in after Robert Schumann died. I don't necessarily know that that's true, but it was a complicated situation. From 1859 to 1862, Brahms served as the conductor of various orchestras. He finally settled in Vienna, Austria, where he lived the rest of his life. Here he composed, conducted orchestras and choirs, and taught piano. And except for the occasional tours as a concert pianist, Brahms lived a rather ordinary life in Vienna. He began devoting more time to composing, but it wasn't until 1873, when he was 40, that he had his first success with a work for orchestra entitled Variations on a Theme by Haydn, who we've talked about too. He was also continuing work on a symphony which he had begun in 1854. This first symphony, which is going to be the listening example that you're going to hear in a minute, it was finally performed in 1876, 22 years after Brahms began composing it. He was now 43 years old. Between 1877 and 1884, Brahms wrote 3 more symphonies, several more concertos, and several pieces of chamber music. For the last 20 years of his life, Brahms continued composing music in all forms except opera. He was recognized throughout Europe as a distinguished, I can't even talk today, I'm sorry, as a distinguished composer and honored by his adopted country, Austria, because remember, he was born in Germany and grew up in Germany. Many young composers moved to Vienna to study with him. He spent summers in the country outside of Vienna. During these summers, he did much of his composing. He was very disciplined as a composer and worked hard at perfecting his craft. In Vienna, Brahms lived a simple life, spending most of his time in a small 3-room apartment. He was very sociable and had many friends, but never wanted to be the center of attention. He dressed shabbily, often in cheap, worn clothing, but he was a shrewd businessman with his music. After his death, he left an estate worth more than $100,000, most of it from royalties on his published works. This was a huge amount of money for a composer who achieved little success until the age of 40. And that is, you might think to yourself, $100,000, I mean, yeah, that's a lot of money, but it's not a lot for like an inheritance or like the amount of money that you leave when you die. But back then, it certainly was, and then definitely for somebody who was a musician or a composer to make that much money. That is a big deal.